Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American history and international human rights law. And of course, today's March the 12th, 2026. It's roughly 13 days since the United States decapitated the leadership of the Iranian Republic and assassinated the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and since then his son has succeeded him. Ayatollah with Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei. Um, Today I want to do a quick analysis of the Iran war. I don't want to be a news reporter. That's not what I'm doing. I study history. Of course, this is a pivotal time in U.S. and world history, and of course we have 45th and 47th President Donald Trump, who is engaged in a war against Iran. Iran is far away from us, right? It's according to intelligence reports, it doesn't pose a threat to the United States because it's far away from us. And however, um, America went to war to assist Israel's ambitions. So America, in its current strikes against Iran, um, it's conducting them jointly with Israel, right? So it's a joint U.S. Israeli strike against Iran. Of course, at some point, it seemed like it was a war, but the president has been changing narratives or his terms, his definitions. Now he's called it a small excursion. And recently, I came across uh, statements by President Trump, which apparently have gone viral. And it sounded like a swan song because President Trump was now, sort of providing a fig leaf or an excuse for why he struck Iran because he basically was laying blame on other people that he went to. He struck them because of um, the pressure from others. That's Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and by the way, Jared Kushner is Jewish, so he's married to Ivanka Trump. That's President Trump's daughter. So Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, who is a um, he's a he's a real estate billionaire, but he also happens to be the special envoy to the Middle East. So President Trump said, well, that it was from pressure, from statements from uh, these three, including the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and that's why he struck Iran. It's because he thought Iran was going to strike the U.S. So that's a different narrative from the preemptive strike narrative that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had indicated earlier. I've done a video discussing that. So now this sounded like a swan song, and considering the psychology of the president, you tell that President Trump, if things were going as he planned, he would want to take full credit, right? Ownership, say, well, it originated from him, the idea was his, but now he seemed to have been giving his it seemed to be like a swan song, like he was giving his off ramp excuse of that, well, this wasn't a good idea and it didn't originate from him. It was misinformation that came from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and so he's laying the blame elsewhere, apparently. So anyway, what I wanted to do today was do an analysis of where we are, like where things stand at the moment. at one point it it appeared that the president might put boots on the ground in Iran, but of course, many military experts, and including U.S. intelligence, have said that's not a good idea. It would be like a suicide mission because that terrain, right, is Iranian terrain, and it's not like Iraq because um, this Iran's terrain is more mountainous, right? It's more mountainous, not like the plateau that the Iraq was. So it's a more mountainous region that's provided natural defenses for Iran. It's antecedent kingdoms, empires as well, right? So the Romans famously could not conquer the Persian kingdoms. That's prior to Iran, so they had to make their boundary, the boundary of the empire. That was according to the first emperor of Rome, Augustus. Right, he gave a direction that Rome's empire should start at the Parthian Empire. The boundary should be the Persian Empire, what came to be what is currently Iran, right? And they shouldn't try and conquer them. Well, they couldn't conquer them because they would always fight back. They'd always come back. The Greeks before the Romans as well. They conquered them. They had some successes with certain cities, but eventually, right, the Persians, that's the ancestors of Iran. They would come back. The Parthians at that time, they would come back and they would overthrow these kingdoms. They would overthrow these empires that dominated them. So that terrain has favored Iranians. Remember, Iran was in an 8-year war against Iraq between 1980 and 1988. And even though Iraq was supported by United States and United States nemesis, USSR, Iran still prevailed. So they were just able to, the support of USSR and USA was just sufficient to stop Iraq from being destroyed, right? But Iran prevailed despite the sanctions, right? There were sanctions against Iran, but the Islamic Republic still prevailed. Um, and of course, that's a reason that the U.S. intelligence, there's intelligence reports. This is unclassified, by the way, and it's out there in the media. I saw it in Reuters, and it said U.S. intelligence report says that the Islamic Republic, the regime, is not at risk of collapse. There's no risk of collapse. So, if the objective of the president was regime change, that has failed, of course, with Ayatollah Khamenei being replaced by his son, who is said to be more of a hardliner. Apparently, it was the father that had restrained Islam, that had restrained the Islamic Republic's um, progress towards acquiring nuclear weapons. And, that restraint is gone. And they said his son is more of a hardliner. So Iran now has more reason to aggressively pursue nuclear weapons. So the issue of regime change has, it's sort of we decapitated the leadership. That's the United States decapitated the leadership, only for it to be replaced by um, someone else, right? The son of the assassinated Ayatollah, who is more of a hardliner. I like to refer to history, so I want to use the opportunity to refer us to the classics, the Greeks, just because there's so many parallels, right? The United States went to war with Iran in the region in order to support its ally Israel, right? Um, because Iran is seen as a regional threat, right, in the Middle East, not to us in the United States, but to Israel's um, um, hegemonic ambitions. That's how analysts see it, right? So I'm going to refer us to a similar situation, right, uh, of the Greeks. There's a famous saying in the English language today as a figure of speech, Pyrrhic victory. Most of us know what a Pyrrhic victory means. That's a victory gained at too great a cost that it ends up destroying you, right? It was uttered famously by uh, uh, Epirus, right? Sorry, Pyrrhus of who was king of Epirus, right? Epirus was in Greece, so Epirus was a Greek king, right? He was a Greek king, and what he said was after it was after the battle against the Romans, right? In two significant battles in Heraclea in 280 BC and in Asculum in 279 BC. So after the battle of 279 BC, so he had won. He won that battle, and they were congratulating him. And King Epirus famously said, "One more victory against the Romans, and we will be utterly ruined." Right? One more victory. So the reason he said this was because the Romans had the ability to replenish their manpower after their defeats, right? At that time, the Greeks were the more powerful, they were more powerful, right? In fact, so let me get into the story. So Rome was becoming an ascending power, right? This was 280 BC. So Rome was, seemed to be threatening its neighbors. It was a regional threat to the Latins, right? To the cities on the Italian peninsula. Now, uh, so Epirus, right, Pyrrhus, who was king of Epirus, right? He was a Greek king and general. He decides to go and assist Tarentum, right? Tarentum was a city in southern Italy, but it was created by the Greeks, by the Spartans actually. Spartans were also Greeks, right? The Spartans. So it was created by the Greeks, and it was culturally um, Greek. It was in southern Italy, so it was sort of a possession of the Greek city-states, right? The Greeks had colonized it, but Rome, of course, was on the Italian peninsula. And they were rising as a power, right? And they were fighting all their neighbors, the Latins. So King Pyrrhus of Epirus went to assist Tarentum, right, in order to check the ascending power of Rome, which was threatening the region. So, so Epirus, sorry, Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus, he did defeat the Romans. He overwhelmed them because he used elephants. He used these elephants in his military, in his army, and it tended to shock the Roman legionnaires, right? And so um, he won that battle. There were two battles at Heraclea and then in Asculum in 279 BC. And so he had defeated the Romans, right? And when they congratulated him, he had incurred such great casualties, such great losses, and he knew that and he said it, that one more battle like this will completely ruin us, right? It will utterly ruin us. So and so the Greeks won that war. Pyrrhus won that war, but eventually, ultimately, the Romans would win. Would win the war. So while Pyrrhus won that battle, rather he won the battle, but ultimately because of the Romans' ability to keep replenishing their manpower because they had so many allies. That was one thing the Romans were good at. They were good at building allies around them, right? Once the Romans conquered people, they would give them, if they found people worthy, they give them Roman citizenship, right? And so they kept expanding. So that was something Romans were very famous for, right? So Romans became an alloy, right? So because they would keep on aligning with people that they had conquered, and so it gave them this tremendous access to manpower, which the Greeks didn't have. So ultimately, in 272 BC, Rome conquered Tarentum eventually, and it became part of Rome, the Roman Empire. That's Tarentum. Tarentum today is Taranto. It's the city of Taranto. It's in nation of Italy. It's in the country of Italy. So that's Taranto. So I thought it was a parallel because America has gone to war against Iran, which posed seemed to be a regional threat to Israel, right? So and so it just like uh, Pyrrhus had gone to war against the Romans in order to help the city of Tarentum. Tarentum was eventually conquered 7 years after that battle of Asculum, in which Pyrrhus, even though he defeated the Romans, he famously said, "One more victory like this, we will against the Romans, and we will be utterly ruined." And eventually, in 272 BC, 7 years after that battle, Tarentum eventually fell to Rome. So, um, far from saying, well, it's a swan song of Israel or whatever, I wanted to also take the time to analyze the losses, the casualties. So I'd done a video earlier in saying, well, because America is clearly the bigger power in terms of military might and resources um, and weaponry, more advanced, larger economy. Iran, which is prepared to fight and apparently has been preparing for the past 40 years, right, since America placed sanctions on it, it's was determined to fight an asymmetric warfare. That's the only way it can fight if it's going to resist the United States. It's going to use other means, right, and attack America's weaknesses. Of course, America's main weakness is the economy, right, and public opinion. And that's exactly one of the things Iran has done effectively. Um, there have been analyzed this relative strikes since, I mean, it's been several days now since I saw the strikes, but I examined the strikes. uh, may the souls of the departed, those the casualties, rest in peace. But war is a terrible thing. It's horrible. I'm a humanist, but for the sake of history, that's why I'm analyzing. I'm going to get into some of the casualties. So the relative strikes, the combined forces of Israel and U.S. have hit um, Iran more, right? So they've hit Iran more with more strikes, roughly about 5,000 strikes since the time I looked at the data. And Iran has been able to hit back at 3,000 strikes. So that's like a 60% rate against its combined adversary. So that's not bad. In fact, yesterday I saw a statement from the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs, right? He sort of, and soldiers, he sort of was giving kudos to the Iranian forces, right? He didn't dismiss them. It was like, they're fighting, right? They're fighting. They asked that a reporter asked him that, was he surprised by the way Iran fought back? Because the president has been surprised. The president thought like they just roll over and they strike them. It would be a quick 1-2, bam bam, they're out, just like in Venezuela. But they've been fighting. They've cost America a lot more. America's lost lives. Uh, but the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said no, that he's not surprised. So the U.S. intelligence, U.S. military, they knew Iran would fight, right? They knew this. And when we go to war, our objectives have to be clear. So if it's regime change, we've not been able to accomplish this. Again, recent intelligence, U.S. intelligence reports, which is unclassified, it just was released. It's all over the news right now. It came out yesterday. At least it was all over. I saw it in Reuters. Uh, the U.S. intelligence says Iran is not at risk of, Iran's regime is not at risk of collapse. There's no risk that it's collapsing anytime soon for any reason. It's very entrenched. It's stronger. So that's that. What's the goal, right? So regime change, it's a failure. I also saw. It appears it's giving them resolve to fight more. I saw a statement by University of Chicago professor and political science expert named Professor John Mearsheimer, and he said, he was referenced citing an article in a science journal named Lancet or something, and he was saying that U.S. imposed sanctions between 1971 and 2021 had actually been responsible for 38 million deaths, right? That the purpose of these sanctions have been to effect regime change, but it's only caused hardship and ravaged innocent civilians. That it's caused 38 million deaths. So you can see there have been sanctions on Iran, right, for like 40 years now, over 40 years, going on 50 years. There have been sanctions on Iran for a very long time, and it's made them poorer. Iran was, as of 1979, prior to the Ayatollahs, right, the Islamic Republic, when it was under the Shah, Iran was had the 18th largest GDP in the world, right? It was one of the top two oil producers. Iran and Saudi Arabia were the top two oil producers. Its economy had the in terms of nominal GDP, it had the 18th largest GDP in the world. GDP means gross domestic product. I'm going to do a second video so that I don't overwhelm this one with economic data. So the GDP of Iran was ranked 18th in the world. Today, its nominal GDP, with all the sanctions, is at number 43, right? So Iran has sort of been relatively impoverished, number 43, compared to what it was in the 1970s, between 1977 and 1979, when its GDP was in the top 20, it was 18th. It was ahead of places like definitely Mexico that are high up in the GDP today. It was ahead of South Korea. South Korea is a prosperous nation today. It was ahead of Turkey, competing with Turkey, so it was doing very well. And in terms of per capita gross domestic product per capita income, it was $7,000, right, in 1979 dollars. In 2024, that's convertible to $25,000. So that's relatively good, a solid middle economy, right? Upper middle economy, $25,000 in 2024 dollars, right? That's a lot for per capita GDP. Again, 25,000 US dollars in 2024 dollars. But so you can see the decline as a result of sanctions. But those sanctions have ended up making the Iranians hard, right? The republic, the Iranians, they were hardened, they're used to it. And one of the methods it's using against America in its asymmetric warfare is hitting the US in terms of the economy, right? The Dow Jones dropped significantly today. It dropped over 739 points, about 1.56% since yesterday's closing, right? The Dow was under 47,000 points. It came under 47,000 points, roughly 46,677 points today. So since its pre-war high on February the 10th of about 50,512 points as the Dow Jones, and to date, it's lost about 7.6%. So it's sliding, it's slipping. So investors don't have confidence in the war because of the geopolitical and regional conflict, the war in Iran. It's affecting it. Of course, Iran has decided to mine the Strait of Hormuz, which by mining the Strait of Hormuz, it's also sort of blockaded it. It's obstructing, it's shuttered that area, that region. And what it ends up doing is it caused the price of oil to spike. The oil prices, Brent closed at over $100. So oil is over $100. Prior to the war, at the start of the year, oil was about $60. Hovering between 60 and mid 60s. per barrel, right? It was about $60 per barrel. Now it's over $100 per barrel. So this is going to eventually impact world prices, inflation, and things like that, because the oil from that area, from the Strait of Hormuz, is responsible for 80% of Asia's oil, right? Over 80% of Asia's oil. Asia is responsible for over 50% of global manufacturing. So most of our goods, finished goods, that's manufacturing value added, right? Finished goods. That's after considering the inputs like raw materials, which come from a lot of places, different places, Africa, the Middle East. Oil is a raw material because it's used in the industries. It fuels the industries that turn out these products, right? It's an input. So manufacturing value added, right? Uh, Asia is responsible for over 50%, right, of manufacturing of finished goods, right, of output, over 50%. So, and their oil comes from the Middle East, that Persian Gulf area, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Um, China alone is responsible for about 30% of global manufacturing, right? So China, there's Japan, there's Japan about 7.5%. There's India, roughly 3%. There's South Korea as well, roughly 2.5%. So, and other Asian countries are responsible for uh, global manufacturing, value added, right, products. But the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, meaning they can't get access to oil, is going to significantly affect them. So it's going to it's going to cause the cost of goods, right, products to go up, right. So it's going to cause a global inflation and a global recession, right. So things will get worse, and so you can see America might be forced to pull out of the war, to end the war very quickly, so not to cause this global nightmare. Um, there's a reason I was talking about the Pyrrhic victory, right? So um, my dad used to tell me something: don't throw good money after bad money. And my dad should know because my father was a bank chairman and a bank CEO, right? Uh, I'm trained as a stockbroker as well. I was a stockbroker, so I understand business. I have an accounting degree. As an auditor prior to in the Department of Defense, prior to my being attacked. I've done videos talking about how I was wrongfully assaulted, raided. I was a victim of a swatting engineered by Montgomery County Police and an impersonator named Jide Iwariri, Howard University professor. So I was assaulted in my home. My rights were violated, and I was injured. I was almost killed. So in any event, my training is also in the stock market. I was a financial advisor, a stockbroker. And my dad, who was a bank chairman and bank CEO, he's late now. He used to tell me as a child, you don't throw good money after bad money, right? And so you learn to cut your losses. Uh, America's gone to this ill-advised war against Iran, and you can see the global impact. If we keep going, right, it has a tendency to favor Iran just because of the nature of the warfare it's used. It's cost America $1 billion a day, right? Since just wait, this war has cost America $1 billion a day. So Iran has been using these cheap drones, right? These cheap drones and cheap ballistic missiles, right? Uh, and America has been using $1 billion, missiles, right? $1 billion defense system in order to stop these drones, the penetration of these drones, right, to deflect them. So every time there's a hit, right, America, Israel, they defend these numerous drones that Iran is able uh, to disseminate, right, just shoot out, propel in volumes, in large numbers. It costs America a tremendous amount. it's at a ratio of 100 to 1, right? The cost is a ratio of 100 to 1. So the cost of America's defense against Iran's drone strikes is it costs about 100 uh, times the cost of each drone attack. So that's a very bad calculus, right? And so it's amounting to a Pyrrhic victory, right? Right. It was the way the Roman forces were depleting the Greeks, at the Battle of Asculum, and the fact that the Romans were able to just keep drawing on manpower, replenish themselves, while it was costing the Greeks a lot. That was why the the Pyrrhus of Epirus famously said, one more victory against the Romans, and it will be our utter ruin. Ruin. So this is where we are right now. I'm going to do a subsequent video, and I'll continue and do a comparison and analysis of the casualties of the war. My name is Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.